The ship trembled under the force of enemy fire, its reinforced hull groaning as another barrage struck. Captain Elias Mercer braced himself against the command console, his sharp blue eyes scanning the tactical display. The enemy, cold, calculating, and relentless, had surrounded them. The odds? Grim. The situation? Hopeless. At least, that's how anyone else might have seen it. "Captain, shields are at 30%. Lieutenant Kara Voss shouted, her voice strained but unwavering. Elias exhaled slowly. His crew was watching, waiting. Fear flickered behind their eyes, but it hadn't settled. Not yet, because they were human, and humans didn't break that easily. Across the bridge, the alien commander's message crackled through the comms, its tone devoid of anything resembling emotion. "Surrender. Resistance is illogical. You cannot win." Silence filled the bridge. The crew exchanged glances, absorbing the weight of those words. The truth was undeniable. Their enemy was right. Statistically, logically, tactically, this was a lost cause. The enemy fleet was bigger, their weapons superior, their defenses impenetrable. Against them stood a single battered human warship, limping through space like a wounded animal. And yet, something shifted in Elias' expression. A slow, knowing smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. He turned to his crew, nodding once. It was all the confirmation they needed. Lieutenant Voss straightened, her hands gripping the controls with renewed determination. The engineers tightened their jaws, fingers flying over panels, rerouting power, improvising solutions on the fly. Even the ship's medic, who had no place in a firefight, set his jaw in quiet defiance. Elias activated the comms, his voice steady, unshaken. "You don't understand, do you?" He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Humans never ask if we can win. We ask what it will take to win." The alien commander hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because hesitation was human. And if there was one thing humans understood better than anyone, it was the power of a single moment. A single decision. Elias turned sharply. "Lieutenant, full power to the engines. We're not going down today." The ship roared to life, a final, desperate maneuver set into motion. And in that moment, it wasn't about logic, statistics, or survival. It was about something far more dangerous, something their enemy could never understand. The unshakable, terrifying, beautiful madness of humanity. And that was why they would win. The engines roared as the ship surged forward, a reckless burst of speed in the heart of an enemy formation. The bridge shook violently, sparks flying from overloaded consoles, but no one hesitated. No one asked if this would work. Because it had to. Elias gripped the armrest of his chair, feeling the pulse of the ship beneath him. It wasn't just steel and circuitry. It was alive, held together by the will of its crew. And right now, that will was unbreakable. "Divert all power to forward shields," he ordered. "Brace for impact." Lieutenant Voss nodded, her fingers moving fast. The lights flickered, the hum of the engines shifting to a strained whine as the ship consumed every last ounce of energy it had left. Ahead, the enemy formation adjusted, ships shifting like a massive metal organism, calculating the most efficient way to crush them. Their movements were precise, their tactics flawless. Cold. Predictable. Elias' mind worked fast. That was their weakness. The enemy relied on probabilities, on logic, on controlled responses. But humans weren't built like that. They were wild, unstable, dangerous in ways no equation could predict. "Captain," a voice called from the comm station. "They're moving to cut us off. If we stay on this course, we'll be trapped. Not if we make them think we've already lost." Voss turned to him, eyes narrowing. "Sir?" Elias leaned forward, his voice steady. "Shut down non-essential systems. Dim the external lights. Make us look like we're running on fumes." Voss hesitated for half a second, then nodded. The bridge darkened, the ship's glow fading. It was a gamble, a move that counted on the enemy's arrogance, their certainty that humans were no more than stubborn survivors running on borrowed time. The alien commander's voice crackled through the speakers again, smooth and detached. "This is futile. Your ship is compromised. Your crew is exhausted. There is no logical reason to continue resisting." Elias let out a short breath, shaking his head. "There's your mistake," he muttered under his breath. Then into the comms, he spoke with calm defiance. "You still don't get it, do you? We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because we refuse to lose." A pause. Just a second. Another hesitation. Then, without warning, Elias barked. "Now." The engines roared back to life, the ship twisting sharply in an impossible maneuver, surging toward the nearest enemy vessel. The enemy hesitated, just as expected. Their calculations didn't account for a ship this damaged making a move this reckless. Fire all forward cannons. The bridge lit up as every remaining weapon tore through the void. Explosions erupted across the enemy ship's hull, sending it spiraling back. But there was no time to celebrate. The rest of the fleet was already adjusting, recalculating, preparing their next move. Status, Elias demanded. Shields at 15%, Voss called. We can't keep taking hits like this. Elias knew she was right. They had bought themselves a moment, just a moment, but the enemy wouldn't hesitate again. The ship's medic, Lieutenant Harris, spoke up from the side of the bridge. Sir, with all due respect, this isn't sustainable. We can't keep this up forever. Elias turned to him, nodding. I know. His jaw tightened. But we don't need forever. We just need one opening. Harris exhaled, then nodded. No more objections. Just trust. The enemy ships adjusted, their weapons locking on, their response faster this time. Elias could almost hear their calculations running, projecting the inevitable outcome. A human ship, outgunned, outmatched, out of options. But they were wrong. Lieutenant Voss, Elias said, his voice quiet but certain. Prepare the jump drive. Voss spun toward him, eyes wide. Sir, if we try to jump this close to their fleet. I know the risks, Elias cut in. But it's our only shot. We don't need to win the battle. We just need to make sure we're still in the fight. Voss hesitated. Then, just like the rest of them, she nodded. The ship groaned as the drive powered up, drawing every last bit of energy. The enemy must have realized something was wrong, because their formation shifted, closing in fast. Their ships swarmed like a mechanical net, weapons primed. Jump drive at 60%, Voss called. Incoming fire. The bridge erupted in chaos. The ship lurched as another blast tore through its side, sending a tremor through every deck. Consoles flickered, alarms blared, the metallic scent of burning circuits filled the air. Elias clenched his jaw. Hold steady. 75%. The enemy's lead vessel charged forward, its weapons locked on. They weren't giving them another chance. Come on, Elias muttered. The alien commander's voice returned, this time sharper. Cease your attempts to escape. There is no. Now, Elias shouted. The ship shuddered, light flaring across the bridge as the jump drive activated. And then, silence. Darkness. The void stretched around them, empty and quiet. No enemy ships. No alarms. Just the hum of a barely functional ship drifting through unknown space. Elias exhaled, his grip loosening. Where are we? Voss whispered. The navigation officer stared at the screen, brow furrowed. I don't know, sir. Elias leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the display. Something was out there. Something massive. Something that hadn't been on any star charts. The ship drifted in the vast unknown, its hull scarred, its systems barely holding together. The hum of the engines was uneven, a reminder of how close they had come to total destruction. Elias sat in his chair, eyes fixed on the view screen. The emptiness of space stretched before them, but something was wrong. This wasn't normal space. Lieutenant Voss, he said quietly. Tell me you have something. Voss's fingers danced over the flickering console, frustration clear in her furrowed brow. Navigation scrambled, sir. We're not picking up any known star systems. She hesitated, then looked up. This region, there's something off. Elias knew that feeling well. The unsettling stillness, the sense that they weren't alone even in the quiet. A captain learned to trust those instincts. Scanners, he asked. Running a deep sweep now, Voss replied. There's something out there. The crew exchanged glances. The jump was meant to get them to safety, but instead, it had thrown them somewhere uncharted, somewhere unknown. And in their current state, they weren't ready for another fight. Captain, the comms officer called out. We're receiving something. It's not a standard transmission. More like a signal. Repeating. Faint. Elias straightened. Origin. The officer adjusted the controls, shaking his head. That's the thing. It's close. Too close. Whatever's out there, it's not just debris. The tension in the air thickened. Every time they thought they had a moment to breathe, the universe had other plans. Put it on speakers, Elias ordered. A distorted, rhythmic pulse filled the bridge. It wasn't language. Not in any way they recognized. It was a pattern deliberate and precise. A beacon? A warning? Or something else entirely? Voss looked up. Sir. I don't think we're alone. Elias leaned forward, watching the screen as the deep space scan finally completed. The results sent a chill through him. A structure. Massive. Hidden in the void, invisible until now. It loomed in the distance, its shape irregular, ancient. It didn't match any known design, human or otherwise. It was just there. The crew fell into a stunned silence. "What the hell is that?" one of the engineers whispered. No one answered. Elias stood. "Helm, take us in." "Nice and slow." "Sir," Voss began, but he shook his head. He knew what she was going to say. That they were too damaged, too vulnerable. That this was a risk they couldn't afford. But they were out of options. They needed answers. The ship moved forward, the structure growing larger with every second. Its surface was dark, covered in layers of unknown material. It wasn't derelict, not completely. There were faint power readings, but no signs of life. The beacon-like signal pulsed again. Harris, the ship's medic, crossed his arms. "Maybe we don't want to know what's inside." "Maybe," Elias admitted. "But we didn't come this far just to turn back now." The closer they got, the more unsettling the structure became. It wasn't just big, it was impossibly vast, stretching beyond what their scanners could immediately map. And something about it felt wrong. Like it shouldn't exist, like it had been lost in time. Voss swallowed hard. "Sir, I think it's waiting for us." Elias turned to her. "Explain." She hesitated, then pointed at the fluctuating signals on her console. The pattern in the signal, it changed. It adjusted when we moved closer. It's not just broadcasting randomly. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "It knows we're here." A heavy silence followed. "Prep a team," Elias finally said. "We're going in." Voss stiffened. "Sir, I have to object. We don't have enough information. We don't even know if it's safe." "Nothing about this is safe," Elias said. "But we didn't survive that battle just to sit here and wonder. Whatever this place is, it's important. And we need to find out why." Voss looked like she wanted to argue, but she just nodded. The rest of the bridge crew exchanged wary glances, then moved into action. The ship's docking bay groaned as the boarding craft was prepped. Elias watched through the observation window as his hand-picked team suited up. Voss was among them. He knew she wouldn't stay behind, no matter her objections. Harris, too, had insisted on coming. If there were any biological threats, they needed someone who could assess them fast. As they stepped onto the shuttle, the ship's comms officer called out, "Captain, before you go." Elias turned. The officer hesitated, then said, "Be careful, sir. We don't know what's in there." Elias gave a small nod. Neither do they. The shuttle detached, gliding toward the dark structure. The pulse of the signal continued, and the doors of the structure began to open. The shuttle glided toward the massive structure, its dark surface stretching endlessly in all directions. The pulse of the signal continued, rhythmic and deliberate, like a heartbeat in the void. Elias sat near the front, his hands gripping the armrests as the docking clamps engaged. The air was tense. No one spoke. "Docking complete," Voss confirmed, her voice hushed. "No signs of atmosphere inside. Readings are inconsistent. Power fluctuating, but nothing I can make sense of." Elias exhaled slowly. "Weapons ready. Helmets sealed. No one takes unnecessary risks." The shuttle door hissed open, revealing an entry corridor lined with metallic walls, dull and lifeless. A thin mist clung to the floor, undisturbed for who knew how long. The air smelled of old metal and something else, something faint, something wrong. "Lights up," Elias ordered. The team activated their helmet lamps, beams cutting through the dim corridor. Their footsteps echoed eerily, the only sound in the vast emptiness. The architecture was strange, almost organic in places, the metal seeming to shift under the lights, as if it didn't quite belong in one form. "This place is ancient," Harris muttered. "Feels abandoned." "Then why was it signaling?" Voss asked. Something had to activate it. No one had an answer. They moved deeper, weapons raised, every step measured. The corridor opened into a massive chamber, vast enough that their lights barely reached the walls. Structures jutted from the floor and ceiling, control stations, observation decks, but all dark, silent. Then the pulse of the signal changed. Faster. Louder. The team froze. "That's not random," Voss whispered. "Something knows we're here." Elias turned sharply. "Everyone stay sharp." The lights flickered. A low hum vibrated through the air. Along the far wall, something shifted. The team instinctively raised their weapons, breath held. And then the wall opened. Not a door. Not a hatch. The metal itself peeled away, folding like layers of skin, revealing a passage beyond. Cold air rushed past them, carrying the scent of something old, something long buried. "That's not normal," Harris said, his voice tight. Elias took a step forward. "Voss readings?" She scanned quickly, shaking her head. "It's not showing up on sensors. Whatever's behind that passage, it wasn't there a second ago." Elias clenched his jaw. Every instinct screamed that they were being watched, that something had been waiting for them. He made his decision. "We go in. Stay close. No one splits up." They moved cautiously through the shifting passage, the walls closing behind them as they walked. The hum in the air deepened, turning into a vibration beneath their feet. Then they saw it. A chamber, massive and circular, its ceiling lost in darkness. In the center stood something impossible, a structure made of intertwining metal and glass, floating above the ground, pulsing with a dull light. It was a machine, a construct, but it wasn't dead. It was waking up. Voss checked her scanner again, her breathing unsteady. "Captain, this thing is generating energy. Massive amounts. Whatever it is, it's activating." Harris stepped closer, staring at the pulsing glow. "This isn't just a structure. It's alive. Not biologically, but something more." Elias studied the thing, his mind racing. The beacon. The signal. The shifting walls. It wasn't random. It had been drawing them in. And then the glow changed. The pulsing light became erratic, almost frantic. And something else filled the air, something deeper than sound, something felt in the bones. A presence. Then the walls around them shifted again. But this time, it wasn't to open a path. It was closing. Trapping them. Voss spun around. "Sir, we need to move. Now!" The chamber rumbled. The air thickened. And then, for the first time, a new sound filled the space. A voice. Not spoken. Not human. A single word carved into their minds. "Survive." And the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the chamber. The pulsing light was gone, leaving only the cold weight of silence pressing down on them. The team's helmet lamps flickered erratically, as if something unseen was interfering with them. Elias tightened his grip on his weapon, listening for anything, any movement, any breath that wasn't their own. "Report," he said, voice steady despite the rising tension. "Systems are glitching," Voss whispered, tapping her wrist display. "I can't get a stable reading. It's like everything's phasing in and out." Then the air changed. A vibration, deep and rolling like distant thunder underground. The metal beneath them shifted, not dramatically, but enough that they all felt it. The chamber was alive, responding to them in ways they didn't understand. "We need to move," Harris said, his voice low but urgent. "I don't care where, we just can't stay here." Elias nodded, motioning them forward. They moved cautiously, heading toward the last visible passage before the lights died. But then the voice returned, inside their heads, without sound, without form. "Survive." It wasn't a command. It was a warning. And then the walls moved. Not like before. This time, they didn't shift to reveal a path. They reached. Long, jagged extensions of the metallic surface stretched toward them, fast and deliberate, like the ship itself had decided they were no longer welcome. Voss yelped, narrowly dodging as one of the shifting appendages struck where she had been standing a second before. The walls were closing in literally. "Run!" Elias shouted. The team sprinted toward the narrowing passage, their boots clanging against the unstable floor. The hum in the air grew into a roar, the structure groaning and twisting as if something deep within had woken up, and it wasn't pleased. They dove through the shrinking gap, barely making it before the walls slammed shut behind them. The sound reverberated through the corridor, final and absolute. They weren't just being tested. They were being hunted. Voss panted, pressing a hand against the cold metal. "That thing, this place, it's not just reacting to us. It's learning." "Then we don't have time to waste," Elias said. "We need an exit. Now." Harris cursed under his breath. "I don't think it wants us to leave." And then came the second twist. A light, soft blue flickering, appeared further down the corridor. Unlike the erratic pulsing they'd seen before, this glow was steady. Purposeful. "Not another trap," Voss muttered. "Maybe," Elias said. "Or maybe it's the only way out." The air around them had grown dense, almost electric, as if the very structure was holding its breath. They moved cautiously, weapons raised, following the glow down the corridor. The walls were different here, not smooth metal, but something older, something etched. Symbols, patterns. Not random. A language. And then they saw it. A figure. Not human. Not entirely machine. It stood at the edge of the light, humanoid in shape but wrong in the details. Limbs slightly too long, body thin and stretched, its form shifting subtly like it was struggling to hold its shape. It raised a hand, slow, deliberate. The voice returned, stronger this time. Survive. But now there was something else beneath the word. Something desperate. A warning. And then, from the darkness behind them, came the sound of something crawling. Fast. Many limbs. Voss's breath caught. Captain. Elias didn't look back. He already knew. They weren't alone anymore. The sound of crawling filled the corridor, sharp and relentless, like claws scraping against metal. Elias didn't hesitate. Move, he barked, pushing the team forward. The figure in the light didn't react. It remained still, its shifting form flickering between solid and something else, something unstable. But the voice, the message, echoed in their heads again. Survive. Then the first shape burst from the darkness behind them. It was fast. Too fast. A twisted mass of metallic limbs and shifting plates, like the walls themselves had come to life. Its movements were erratic, but its intent was clear. It was hunting them. Voss fired first, her shot hitting center mass. The thing recoiled, but it didn't fall. Instead, its form adapted, the wound sealing almost instantly. Harris cursed. It's regenerating. Elias gritted his teeth. Then don't stop shooting. Go! The team sprinted, firing as they ran. The corridor twisted, narrowing, the shifting walls forcing them toward a single destination, the glowing chamber ahead. The figure remained motionless, watching. Waiting. The moment Elias and his team crossed into the chamber, the walls behind them slammed shut. The creature was locked out, but the danger wasn't over. Because now the figure moved. It stepped forward, its body stabilizing, becoming clearer. Its features flickered between human and something not. The voice filled the chamber once more, but this time, it wasn't just in their heads. You were not meant to come here. Elias raised his weapon, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. What is this place? The figure tilted its head. A test. A prison. A warning. Voss clenched her jaw. Then why send the signal? Why lead us here? The walls trembled. The glow pulsed faster. The entire structure was reacting. The signal was not an invitation, the figure said. It was a distress call. The ones before you failed. Elias frowned. Failed what? The figure stepped aside, revealing something behind it. A console. Ancient, covered in symbols. Symbols that now pulsed in a pattern Elias recognized. A countdown. Voss's eyes widened. Sir, that's not just power generation. It's a containment system, the figure interrupted. And you have disrupted it. Elias's stomach dropped. You're saying, the prison is failing, the figure confirmed. And what was locked inside is waking up. The walls shuddered violently. The sound of metal twisting, breaking, filled the air. The thing that had chased them wasn't alone. There were more. And now, nothing was stopping them from getting out. Harris ran to the console, scanning its interface. Tell me there's a way to fix this. The figure watched him, unreadable. Only one. Elias already knew. We have to destroy the structure. The figure nodded. If it survives, nothing else will. The team exchanged glances. There was no debate. No hesitation. This wasn't just about them anymore. Voss was already working the console. I can overload the core, but we won't have long. Elias turned back to the figure. You knew this would happen, didn't you? The figure met his gaze. I was the last to survive. The last to warn. But I am not meant to leave this place. The chamber shook violently. The distant walls were cracking. The creatures were breaking through. Time's up, Harris shouted. Elias grabbed his comm. Shuttle, do you read? A burst of static then. Loud and clear, Captain. Prep for emergency evac. We're coming in hot. The team ran. The walls were closing in, the structure collapsing, the creatures breaking free. But Elias didn't look back. They sprinted through the corridors as alarms blared, red warning lights flashing. The moment they reached the docking bay, the shuttle was already waiting, hatch open. They leapt inside, the engines roaring to life as they took off. Through the viewport, the structure cracked apart. Energy pulsed wildly, arcs of lightning dancing across its surface. And then, detonation. The explosion swallowed the structure in blinding light. Shockwaves rippled outward, forcing the shuttle into a chaotic spin before stabilizing. Then silence. The monstrous station was gone. The creature's gone. Elias exhaled, staring at the empty void where the structure had been. Let's go home. But as they turned, Voss stiffened. Sir, look. Floating among the debris, untouched by the explosion, was the figure. Watching. Waiting. And then, before their eyes, it flickered out of existence. A final whisper echoed in their minds. Not the last. The shuttle drifted in silence, the wreckage of the structure slowly vanishing behind them. Elias sat in the cockpit, hands resting on the controls, but his mind was elsewhere. The mission was over. They had survived. But the last words of the figure echoed in his head. Not the last. Voss leaned against the console, exhaling shakily. That wasn't just some old ruin. It was a warning system, a containment field, and we destroyed it. Harris shook his head, staring out into the void. We didn't have a choice. If we hadn't shut it down, those things would have gotten out anyway. We just sped up the process. Elias knew he was right, but it didn't make the weight on his chest any lighter. He turned to Voss. Do we have any readings? Any sign of those things still out there? She checked her display, scrolling through the data. Nothing. Whatever was inside that structure, it was tied to it. No energy signatures. No movement. Just empty space. That should have been reassuring. But it wasn't. The shuttle's comms crackled. Command to recon team. We're receiving your transmission. Status report. Elias took a breath before responding. Mission complete. Structure is destroyed. No survivors except us. He hesitated. Request priority debrief. We have a lot to discuss. There was a pause before the reply. Understood. Stand by for approach coordinates. As the shuttle adjusted course, the crew sat in silence. No one spoke, but the same unspoken thought hung between them. That figure, the way it had watched them, the way it had flickered out of existence instead of being destroyed, meant something. It had been warning them, guiding them. And it hadn't died with the station. Elias clenched his jaw. That thing. I don't think it was trapped there. I think it was waiting for something. Voss swallowed. Waiting for us. No one disagreed. The stars stretched endlessly outside the viewport, cold and distant. Whatever had been buried in that ancient station was gone. But the universe was vast. If one prison existed, how many others were out there? And if that was not the last? Elias sat back, watching the stars blur as they jumped to FTL. The mission was over, but he knew the real story had just begun. They had survived. But something else had too.